Dr. Hamid Darbandi, the representative of KRG President Masoud Barzani, Dr. Yusuf Soran, the Minister of Higher Education, President Musli Mustafa, President of Soran University, distinguished guests and graduates, thank you very much for asking me to speak to you this afternoon. Now, Americans usually start off their talks with a joke, but jokes are very difficult to tell in another language. So the polite thing for you to do is simply laugh, even if you do not understand my joke. So here's my joke. During the Korean War, a U.S. general told a long 10-minute joke to the Turkish soldiers, but then the Turkish translator spoke for only 20 seconds, and all the Turkish soldiers broke out in laughter. The American general was very pleased to get such a positive response to his joke, but how could the translator say in just 20 seconds his entire 10-minute joke? The Turkish interpreter told the general, well, I told the soldiers that the American had just told you a very funny joke, so everybody laugh. And of course, the Turkish soldiers obeyed and they all laughed. The point is that Turkey would be a very good ally for an independent KRG, since Turkish soldiers are strong and implement orders. A decade ago, Kurdish independence was a Turkish red line, a casus belli, cause for war. But today, economic and now political ties have made Turkey your #1 ally, at least in this region. Economically, Turkish exports to the KRG in 2013 were about $12 million. There are over 1,300 Turkish companies doing business in the KRG. Massive energy deals have been signed. Politically, in November 2013, Turkey invited KRG President Masoud Barzani to Turkey as KRG President. This past summer, in June 2014, Turkey even announced that it would accept KRG independence. Turkey now sees the moderate, secular Kurds as a better neighbor than the volatile Arabs to the south, including the very dangerous Islamic State and rival Iran. But of course, Turkish support for you will also, Turkey wants to control the KRG. So, do not put all your independence eggs in one Turkish basket. Most importantly, especially when dealing with Turkey, do not pursue Kurdish irredentia. What is irredentia? A famous Italian word that means unredeemed land, advocating annexation of territories of another state because of common ethnicity or previous historical possession. Everybody has irredentia. It is often a cause for war. For example, Germany had Alsace-Lorraine, Turkey, northern Iraq, Russia, Crimea, even the US, all have irredentia. The main reason Turkey has opposed KRG independence in the past is fear of your irredentia claims on historical Kurdish areas in eastern Turkey. So, you must convince Turkey You present no threat to Turkish territorial integrity. The Kurds in Turkey can obtain their rights through Turkey becoming more democratic and the success of the current Turkish PKK peace process that was launched in 2013. An independent KRG must encourage Kurdish rights in Turkey only through these democratic procedures and processes, not by pursuing a pan-Kurdish state. Now, the U.S. de facto alliance. The United States has to be reminded that if you don't visit the Middle East, it will visit you. But also, please remember that the United States gave you your current position. So be understanding of its hesitancy to fully support your independence. In addition, remember the U.S. airstrikes and military aid were indispensable in August 2014 when the Daesh drove within 20 miles of Erbil. And in September this year, U.S. President Barack Obama proposed further support to degrade and eventually eliminate the Islamic State. However, the United States opposes Kurdish independence because it thinks it will lead to instability and war in the Middle East. Quite an ironic claim, since a unified Iraq has set the bar on mass violence so high. That is, look at all the terrible violence trying to hold Iraq together has led to. So, you must convince the United States that Kurdish independence will lead to stability and peace, not to war. How do you do this? Emphasize how the Kurds are a moderate Islamic country that pursues a secular path. This is exactly what the United States seeks. In the past, the United States opposed Kurdish independence because its NATO ally Turkey did. Now that Turkey has actually declared that it would accept KRG independence, there is no reason for the United States not to. The U.S. is slowly coming around to changing its foreign policy to accept Kurdish independence, if it comes. For example, the recent Center for American Progress report by Michael Wirtz and Max Hoffman. The Kurds are now the front line against IS. If Iraq cannot defend itself, the KRG must defend itself. If the KRG had not taken Kirkuk, the Islamic State would have. The U.S. must come to see that trying to artificially hold Iraq together will lead to more problems than to let it split up. Remember how the U.S. mistakenly tried to hold former Yugoslavia together, and how this led to more destruction and violence than if the U.S. would have simply supported the desire of Yugoslavia's parts to become independent. Also, the breakup of the former Soviet Union did not lead to mass violence. Now we seem to be nearing a situation of a former Iraq. So the U.S. will take more time before it reaches the correct decision on KRG independence. As Sir Winston Churchill once said, Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing after they have exhausted all other possibilities. Already, the U.S. may be saying one thing in public and doing the opposite in private. For example, the former Deputy Director of the CIA, John McLaughlin, recently suggested that Kurdistan might be the only location from where to attack the Islamic State. Further reports indicate that the United States is expanding a secret facility near the Erbil airport. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel suggested on July 3rd, 2014, that such a center has already begun to operate. I can tell you from my own knowledge that the hope of some in the U.S. military is to build a big U.S. logistics base, a huge air base, and a very large military training center in Iraqi Kurdistan to train and support the Peshmerga with the approval of your government. Because the KRG would be a most reliable partner for the United States against the jihadists in the region and could also respond to energy shortages the West might face, as Howery Mansurberg, Nauro Zagros, and Tyler Fisher recently noted in their article, Support for Kurdish Autonomy is Support for Energy Security. The famous Prussian military strategist Karl von Clausewitz wrote, "War is politics by other means." You cannot kill all those who support the Islamic State. Rather, use political tactics to peel off most of ISIS's support by offering reasonable position, status, and money to Sunni Arabs for their support, as U.S. General David Petraeus did in 2007. The Daesh may have already committed a fatal strategic error by overreaching themselves and making practically every state in the world their enemy. Iran. Iran, like Turkey, is a great state with a long and distinguished history of successful statecraft. However, unlike Turkey, Iran still very much opposes KRG independence because it fears Turkish influence over an independent KRG. Iran also fears an independent KRG would give Israel more influence in the Middle East. Iran seems to think that an independent KRG is a Western scheme to partition Iraq and hurt Iran. Although this denies how the U.S. officially continues to oppose KRG independence and support Iraqi unity. Iran also fears an independent KRG would incite Iran's Kurds to seek independence. An independent KRG would be a moderate Sunni and secular state and thus a geopolitical and ideological rival of Shiite Iran. If Iraq remains united, Iran will continue to have great influence over its Shiite majority rulers in Baghdad. But a divided Iraq with KRG independence will greatly reduce Iran's influence. So Iran has sought to play the PUK and KDP off against each other to prevent KRG independence. Conclusion: Iran will prove difficult diplomacy for an independent KRG. Iraq. Iraq, or should I more correctly say former Iraq, will be very difficult to have accept KRG independence, but will have no choice but to accept it if Iraq disintegrates. Clearly, Iraq has already reached a condition where it no longer meets Max Weber's famous definition of a state as being one which possesses a monopoly on the usage of legitimate force within a given territory. Baghdad, the KRG, and Islamic State all compete for the sole legitimate use of force within former Iraq. Baghdad, taking so long to form a new government despite the ISIS threat, illustrates how Iraq's lawmakers are not going to let a war get in the way of their political squabbles. So you must continue to show Baghdad that you did not cause Iraq to fall apart and only took the road to independence when you had no other alternative. Show Baghdad that you will work with it and fairly share the heritage of former Iraq, but maintain a strong Peshmerga and maintain the Turkish and U.S. de facto alliances as your ultimate protection. Iraq can also be an alternative to Turkey so that Turkey does not try to dominate you. Syria, or former Syria, can serve as another potential alternative route for exporting KRG oil to the Mediterranean Sea. Rojava can also prove an ethnic ally to buffer your relations with Baghdad. Damascus and Ankara, as well as giving you an alternative route for exporting your oil to the outside world. However, Rojava's Western Kurdistan is controlled by the PYD-PKK, a Kurdish rival of the KRG. Therefore, the KRG must use careful diplomacy when dealing with Rojava. Israel. Israel is of only secondary importance to you because it is still a very sensitive topic among the Arabs, Iranians, and even Turks, who must be your main concern. The Kurds largely live in an Arab, Iranian, and Turkish world, and the KRG is part of historic Iraq. So, you do not want to emphasize relations with Israel that would only alienate much more important Turkey, Iran, and Syria. Kurdish unity. You must curb your own internal irredentia. I am talking about Kurdish divisions, specifically the KDP and PUK. Historically, you have been controlled by your enemies using divide and rule tactics against you. So, if you cannot curb your own internal divisions, all my recommendations about Turkey and the U.S. are worthless. KDP and PUK divisions are still real. Iran is even now trying to hinder the future prospects of KRG independence by supporting the PUK, who is less in favor of it and rather seems more interested in jockeying for top positions in Baghdad against the KDP, which seems more in favor of independence. Even more, of course, you must prevent KRG versus PKK divisions from ruining your future prospects for independence. Finally, let me make some very relevant comments about the relativity of independent statehood in general and how this applies to you. From this perspective, independent statehood is more of a process than a definite point. Even without formal independence, the KRG enjoys many of the attributes of statehood: its own president and parliament, its own military, the Peshmerga, 2 international airports, visa control of those entering, and so forth. Indeed, the KRG enjoys most of the benefits of independence without suffering its problems. As long as the KRG remains a federal part of Iraq, its regional neighbors and the U.S. accept the KRG's existence. In addition, the KRG remains entitled to 17% of Iraq's budget. Thus, for the time being, it may be best for the KRG to continue its quasi-independence and not seek complete independence. However, the recent existential IS threat has merely postponed eventual KRG independence. Indeed, the KRG may emerge from the Islamic State threat even stronger and therefore more likely to become independent. Thus, everything I have said here about the KRG diplomatic strategy to pursue when it becomes independent remains valid. So, in closing, it is very fitting that your university's graduation may also be a prologue, introduction to your country's graduation to independence. And like your own individual graduation, decisions in future, so also you must wisely and bravely choose Kurdistan's future. Thank you and good luck to all of you.